Dirty deeds. Target locked. Reinvest.
For a lot of people, 2020 was brutal. Jobs disappeared, nerves snapped, shelves went empty. The good people had it rough. The bad ones did too. I was somewhere in between. I was a functional opioid addict when COVID hit. Supply chains going to hell. And everyone being on edge made it harder than usual to score anything clean. On top of that, the restaurant I worked at kept shutting down for weeks at a time. My stimulus check vanished in days, and after a few weeks of burning through what little savings I had, I was genuinely scared. Dealers kept going dark for lockdown breaks. The ones still working jacked up prices. Fewer connections, higher demand, higher risk. Perfect storm. I needed a way to make money fast. I tried a bunch of schemes, one of which was setting up an onion domain, a Tor hidden service on the dark web. Yeah, I know the tech nerds already want to correct the terminology, but that's close enough. At first, it was half experiment, half joke. I wanted to learn how to build a Tor site anyway, so what I put up was something between a gag and a desperate Hail Mary. I actually put work into it. When it finally went live, I was stupidly proud. Right at the top of the page was the name and pitch. Dirty deeds done dirt cheap, 5D for short. Shout out to the AC/DC song. It's one of my favorites, and it summed up exactly what I wanted to offer to folks in East Texas and Western Louisiana. See, I might have been a junkie, but I was also an adrenaline junkie. I wasn't trying to get hired to walk old ladies' dogs or help strangers move house. I wanted something with teeth, something to make lockdown feel less dead. So I sold revenge. If you had a cheating ex, a bullying boss, some jerk neighbor, you paid me and I'd prank them. Not harmless pranks either. Mean, humiliating, memorable. The deal was simple, half up front, half on completion. If they stiffed me on the second half, I'd make sure their target found out exactly who'd hired me. That insurance policy usually did the trick. I didn't expect much. It wasn't like I'd launched a normal website that could show up on Google with a little SEO money. You needed a Tor browser to reach 5D, and average people don't use Tor. Then one day, on a whim, I checked the site's email. There was a job request waiting. The message was from an anonymous user, like all of them, and she claimed her ex-boyfriend was an abusive asshole who needed to be taken down a peg. I pitched an idea. Shove sardines into his car's air vents. Middle of a Texas summer, that thing would reek to high heaven in a day or two. She loved it. Sent half the payment in Bitcoin. That night I drove to the address she'd given me and did the deed. I took photos for proof, headed home, and got the rest of my money. She was thrilled with how it turned out. When I told her to recommend me to a friend, she actually did. 2 days later, I got my second job. Then nothing. Those were the only 2 jobs I had for about 3 months. But when Governor Greg Abbott announced the second stay-at-home order, people apparently got bored enough to start poking around on the dark web. Business picked up, slow but steady. I smeared dog crap on a guy's front door handle after a client said he cheated them out of overtime. I covered a woman's car in slices of cheap bologna, a mosaic, basically, because the acid in it eats through clear coat in the sun and ruins the paint. I was told she'd given some kid a vindictive grade. I didn't care either way. If the Bitcoin showed up, I did the job. I rolled industrial glitter onto someone's driveway so it would never fully go away. I sprayed herbicide on another person's lawn so that when the grass died, it spelled out a vulgar word big enough for the neighbors to read. Once, I slathered a whole house with pure fish emulsion in the middle of the night. That stuff seeps into wood, brick, anything, and makes the place smell like rotting low tide for weeks. Piece by piece, I became an artist of spite. I posted before and after photos on the site, carefully scrubbed of anything that could identify me, and it worked. People saw what I could do. Business snowballed. At first, everything stayed light, relatively speaking, petty revenge with no real harm beyond property damage and shame. Then the job started getting darker. Someone hired me to move a package from an empty pickup spot to an empty dead drop. I never opened it. Could have been drugs, could have been a burner gun wrapped in a t-shirt and duct tape. The pay was good. I didn't ask questions. Those courier jobs became my main source of income for a while. 1 or 2 a week, easy money. Then came the requests that actually made me pause. One client had me pick up a USB drive from a dead drop, deliver it to a guy in Kilgore, wait while he did something to it, then return it to the drop. I don't know what was on that drive, and I never want to, but the man I dealt with looked like he lived in the kind of world where people disappear. That was the first time I got home and thought, maybe I should start saying no. By then, the restaurant had reopened and I had shifts again. I didn't need the cash nearly as badly. I was doing it for kicks. I took a few more jobs, nothing quite as sinister, but there was a clear shift. Fewer prank requests, more work that left my stomach in knots afterward. I decided I was going to shut 5D down. That's when the last request came in. By then, I only checked 5D's email once or twice a week. I skimmed most messages, ignoring stuff that screamed felony louder than stinking up someone's car. Then I saw the offer, $10,000 for one night's work. Normally, I charged a couple hundred for simple gigs, a couple grand for elaborate ones, like the fish emulsion house. 10,000 was a fantasy number. I wrote back, if the job required me to physically injure someone, I wasn't interested. They replied that I wouldn't have to hurt anyone exactly, but I might need to use coercion and possibly physical force. For 10 grand, I was willing to get rough with someone, as long as I could get away clean. Only then did I ask what the job actually was. That's when they dropped it. They wanted me to kidnap someone. Obviously, I had questions. First being, who? The answer blindsided me, not because of who they said, but because they didn't say anyone. They told me it could be any female. Ideally an adult, but a child would do. That was the moment I thought, okay, this is a troll or a federal sting. Then they lost me completely by claiming they were part of some shadowy group that practiced live cannibalism. Not just cannibalism like the Donner Party, you know, survival horror. Live cannibalism, cutting pieces off the victim while they're still alive, cooking and eating those pieces in front of them. I called bullshit, told them they were full of it, and that they wouldn't be hearing from me again. That's when they sent me their XPUB. Without getting too far into crypto jargon, if you plug someone's XPUB or YPUB, ZPUB into a blockchain explorer, you can see the total balance and transaction history on that wallet's addresses. It's a stupid thing to give a stranger because it's like handing them your bank statement. But it proved they weren't some edgelord teenager. The wallet had roughly $500,000 worth of Bitcoin in it. Transactions in and out every day. Some transfers were way over 10K serious volume. It was the strongest proof they could have offered that they were real. I stared at the numbers, stunned. Not horrified, yet. Just impressed in a very wrong way. Having that much Bitcoin didn't necessarily prove the cannibal stuff, and part of me still suspected a very elaborate prank. But instead of ducking my questions, the guy calmly and patiently addressed every concern I raised. He refused to name his organization, just said they existed. He emphasized they didn't want someone who would panic and run to police if a body turned up and a murder investigation started. They needed someone who could live with selling a human life for a few $1,000s. Apparently, they decided that person was me. They misjudged me. Badly. We ended up talking from about 11 p.m. to 3:30 in the morning. Methods, logistics, contingency plans. They had a drop-off location already arranged and claimed they could guarantee security there. They even offered coaching on how to intimidate, restrain, and transport a victim. I wrote a lot of it down. I'm not going into specifics here. YouTube really doesn't need a how-to-kidnap manual, but believe me, the detail was chilling. It was further proof this wasn't a joke. Whoever they were, they'd either done it before or put serious thought into it. I need to be clear. From the moment the word kidnap appeared, I had zero intention of going through with it. I was out. Every question I asked after that was for one reason only: to gather as much information as possible for law enforcement later. I never actually accepted the job. I just said I was interested and would confirm within 24 hours. Not even 2 hours later, 5D was offline for good. I was exhausted and desperately needed sleep, but I couldn't shut my brain off. I went out before dawn to find a payphone. Using a text-to-speech app on my phone, I had it speak to a police dispatcher so my real voice wouldn't be recorded. I dumped everything: what I'd been asked to do, where, how, and especially the address of the drop-off site. I figured whoever controlled that location had to have it in their real name, which might give police something concrete. What pushed me to call wasn't the money, or even the horror of what they wanted. It was one particular line the anonymous user had typed after I'd said no. He reminded me it was 5 figures for one night's work, said it would be worth my time, and that I wouldn't get caught if I did it right. I refused again. Then he said something I'll paraphrase as best I can: "If you won't do it, we'll find someone who will." At that point, I still hadn't seen the Bitcoin wallet, so the words didn't really land. But after I saw that $500,000 balance and all those transactions, the line hit differently. Even if I wrote him off as a fantasist, he clearly had the resources to keep looking until he found somebody desperate or depraved enough to say yes. I wasn't sure I'd ever hear anything more about it. No arrests, no news stories. People lie online all the time. Maybe the cops would hit a dead end. Months later, I saw a headline that made my blood run cold. It was September. I was doom-scrolling half-bored when I saw a local story about a Texas man convicted of soliciting murder and cannibalism online. His name was Alex Barter. According to the article, Barter had contacted what he thought was another predator, but who was actually an undercover cop. He'd given nearly the exact same pitch I'd heard. He'd pay to have a victim kidnapped, fully aware of what would happen to them afterward. The officer was told, point blank, that the victim would be murdered and eaten. The coverage didn't mention any Bitcoin wallet, and there were some differences in detail, but the overlap was eerie. Then I saw Barter's picture. If you Google him, you'll see what I mean when I say I'm being generous calling him not a criminal mastermind. He was 23 at sentencing, and supposedly acting alone. He'd actually been arrested back in 2018. It just took until 2020 for the court case to wrap up, which raised one nasty question. If Barter was solo and already in custody by the time I got that offer, who the hell was I talking to? That's what convinces me there really is more than one of these people. Maybe not some monolithic Illuminati-style cabal, but a network. They've got money, and they've got people, frontmen, fall guys, runners. The Barters of the world take the heat while whoever's funding them stays out of sight. I think the guy I spoke to was one of those middlemen, and knowing that people like him exist still scares the hell out of me. Because he was right about one thing: if I wouldn't help, someone else eventually would. That thought somewhere out there they kept shopping the job around until someone bit, is what still keeps me awake some nights, even years later. My name is Max. I grew up in Germany, and for as long as I can remember, I tried to live a good, orderly life. I honored my parents. I worked hard in school and at university. I planned my career in one of Germany's top manufacturing companies with almost obsessive precision. I was ambitious, aggressively so, but I never saw myself as arrogant. I tried to stay ethical, fair, and humble in everything I did. I tithed a portion of my salary to charity and volunteered some of my free time at a local organization for the deaf. I'll admit there was ego in it. Doing good made me feel good, but it still was good work, and I never thought anything like that could lead me into danger. By 2010, I was 32, married for 2 years, and we had just decided to start trying for a baby. I hadn't been in anything resembling a fight since a shoving match during a schoolyard football game. Life was simple and happy. That stretch of time planning for a child, building a home, daydreaming about the future, might have been the happiest of my life. Also the most exhausting. Not in the way people joke about. I mean the planning. My wife and I obsessed over nursery layouts, furniture, colors, finances. I lost sleep over paint samples and crib prices. At the same time, I'd put my name in for a promotion. A senior colleague had resigned, and there was an opening for a sort of assistant director role in my division. I wouldn't be the top man, but I'd be above the colleagues I'd worked alongside for years. Almost everyone applied. We were all open about it, wishing each other luck, talking about may the best man win. I believe that was genuine, mostly. One afternoon, a friend from another department pulled me aside. He had some inside information. He was dating a secretary named Clara who sometimes worked in the executive lounge. She'd overheard one of the managers saying I'd interviewed very well and that I'd made the final shortlist of 4 candidates. I was elated. I rode that high for the rest of the day. By closing time, the thrill had worn off and the exhaustion hit. I remember sinking into the driver's seat of my car and thinking about taking a short nap before I drove home so I wouldn't be a danger on the Autobahn. I decided against it. Only then did I fasten my seatbelt and glance in the rearview mirror. If I'd done that even 5 seconds later, I might not be alive. A masked man filled one corner of the mirror. I thought I was about to be carjacked. I hit the central lock button, jammed the key into the ignition and tried to start the car, planning to speed away. The moment the engine turned over, the shooting started. My windshield exploded into glittering shards. Rear windows shattered. I instinctively dropped down as low as I could in my seat. Later, a police officer told me one bullet passed clean through the headrest where my skull had been a heartbeat earlier. The car was still drivable, but I was panicking. I lurched it forward, almost swerving into another row of parked cars as I tore out of the lot and into the open drive. I don't know when the gunman stopped firing. I was consumed by escape. I only straightened up again, back in a normal driving position, once I'd made it off company property and onto the street. I must have driven for several minutes at high speed, too fast, honestly. The thought of being pulled over by the police even crossed my mind, but I almost welcomed it. Better to explain to an officer than be murdered in a parking lot. I pulled into a fast food restaurant's lot and finally stopped. My hands were shaking as I called the police. A patrol car arrived within minutes. The officer listened, calm and professional, then drove me to the station to give a full statement. My own car was essentially scrap. They arranged a ride home afterward. I walked into our flat and had to tell my wife, who burst into tears, that someone had just tried very hard to kill me. For weeks, I assumed it had been an especially aggressive attempted carjacking. Horrible but random. I was wrong. The police caught the shooter. I have great respect for our federal police, but even so, the speed with which they tracked him down impressed me. I assumed greed or addiction had driven him. He'd want my car, sell it, buy drugs, whatever. Greed was involved, but not for my car. He'd wanted my life. He told investigators he'd been hired after spotting a contract on some hidden website that only certain people knew how to access. When the detective explained it to me, he used the English term dark web. At the time, it didn't mean much to me. I only later realized how many similar cases existed. The shooter said he'd been hired anonymously and had no idea why someone wanted me dead. But the person paying him clearly knew my exact work schedule and where I parked. That strongly suggested the order had come from inside the company. Everyone in my department and several levels of management was questioned. No one was charged. No hard evidence turned up. No emails, no chats, nothing. I wasn't surprised. From the beginning, the prognosis had been grim. Whoever placed the hit knew how to hire someone anonymously on the dark web. Erasing the trail from a home computer would be child's play compared to that. For all we knew, they'd used a public terminal somewhere. The digital forensics teams came up empty. I wanted to quit immediately. How could I sit in meetings, share coffee, and make small talk with colleagues knowing one of them might have tried to have me murdered? I told the executives that if they wouldn't or couldn't find the culprit, I would resign. Ironically, that's when they told me I'd gotten the promotion. I no longer wanted the job, but then they sweetened the offer beyond anything I'd imagined. Higher salary than initially posted, extra benefits, a fortified and guarded company parking lot, a large, one-time payment, free access to the company's lawyers to keep the story out of the press. They were desperate to avoid bad publicity. If I'd been single, I might have walked away on principle. But we were trying to start a family. My wife and I talked for hours, and she eventually said we couldn't pass up security like that. Reluctantly, I agreed. I stayed. Part of me hoped sitting in that office, watching faces, analyzing reactions after the fact, would let me spot the person who'd wanted me dead. I never did. None of the other candidates for the promotion, including the final 3 I'd supposedly beaten out, showed any strange behavior in the aftermath. That led some people to wonder if the order had come from outside the company. Maybe a rival firm, maybe a disgruntled former employee trying to harm the business. To this day, it's the most haunting mystery of my life. Not just because I almost died, because it taught me something I hadn't wanted to believe. You can do everything right. You can keep your conscience clear, be generous, disciplined, and kind, and still draw the attention of evil you'll never understand. Hello, Joel. You can call me H. I grew up in London. As a kid, I was obsessed with computers. My parents did fairly well in their careers, well enough to buy a PC back in the Windows 95 days. I'd spend hours messing around in MS Paint or playing little games off the floppy disks my dad brought home from work. That machine felt like magic. As I got older, I wanted to know how the magic worked. In 2000, my dad signed us up for a dial-up internet connection, and that was that. I became a full-blown computer nerd, and I don't think I could have picked a better time. The UK was in the later stages of its IT boom. A degree in anything computer-related was basically a ticket onto the gravy train. Companies needed people who could run their networks and servers and get them online for e-commerce. If you could handle that, you were worth far more than they paid you. I landed one of those jobs in 2008. Saying I'd fallen on my feet doesn't really cover it, but I earned it. I was good at what I did because I genuinely loved it. Years before that, I'd been reading about something that sat somewhere between technical concept and urban legend: the deep web. People mix up the deep web and the dark web all the time. The deep web is just any part of the internet that isn't publicly indexed, behind logins, paywalls, private servers. Perfectly normal, like the difference between public streets and someone's house. The dark web is a sliver of that space, made up of sites that deliberately hide themselves and often deal in illegal things. It was inevitable that, once the tech existed, someone would start using it for crime: drugs, weapons, contraband. By the late 2000s, that line had been crossed and the term dark web really took hold. Naturally, I was fascinated, so I went looking. That's how I found Silk Road. It's a fitting name, borrowed from the ancient trade routes that carried spices and silk to Europe. But this Silk Road was anything but legal. It launched around 2011, run by an American. It didn't just sell drugs, it sold everything. Though the everything category was dominated by narcotics, guns, hacking tools, banned media, gray market sweets from Asia, you name it. The rules fit on one hand. Most of it ran on an honor-based system of ratings and reviews. It flipped my idea of drug dealing upside down. I'd always pictured low-purity garbage cut with whatever, dealers trying to scam users at every step. Silk Road was the opposite. It connected wholesalers, and sometimes actual manufacturers, directly to buyers. High purity, low prices, no middlemen. People made obscene amounts of money. I browsed Silk Road every day for about 2 weeks. Curiosity slowly mutated into greed dressed up as opportunity. I liked my job and made decent money, but my life was boring. I craved excitement. This was a shiny new system to obsess over. I researched wholesale shipping, pricing, purity, profit margins. Once I'd convinced myself I knew enough, I pulled the trigger. Early 2012, I ordered half a kilo of heroin for about 10 grand in crypto. Seller ratings on Silk Road were solid. I found a vendor with hundreds of glowing reviews who promised to hide the product inside a small appliance. Part of me still assumed it wouldn't show up, even with all the safeguards against scams. Then Royal Mail delivered a parcel to my flat. Heart pounding, I opened it. Inside was a computer monitor. I took it apart. There it was, half a kilo of golden brown Afghan heroin in tightly sealed plastic baggies, enough to put me away for 12-16 years. Next step, find a buyer. You'd think that would be the hard part. It wasn't. On a Friday night, I went into town and walked up to the first homeless guy I saw. I told him I'd give him a tenner if he showed me where to buy heroin. He took the money, led me to a phone, dialed a number, and about 15 minutes later a teenager on a bike rolled up. My guide bought a bag of brown. That's when I stepped in. I told the kid I wanted to speak to his boss. I could see his suspicion even in the dark, but after I explained a little, hinted at volume, at quality, he relented, took my number, and said he'd pass it along. Within 2 hours, I had a call. I was told to walk to a particular dark, empty street and wait. Before I left, I did something important. I put on a ski mask. When 3 hooded teenagers eventually appeared, they nearly jumped out of their skins when I stepped out of the shadows to greet them. Once they realized I wasn't there to rob or stab them, they asked to see what I had. I'd brought a small sample. One of the lads, a sickly-looking bloke who turned out to be older than the others, dabbed some onto his fist and snorted it. I knew how strong the product was, but seeing it hit him was still shocking. He went slack on his feet. Couldn't speak, couldn't hold his head up, just swayed while his mates laughed. They were clearly impressed. After the usual cliché, "You're not the police, are you?" They led me up to the top floor of a block of flats, the trap house. That's where I met Steven. He zeroed in on the ski mask immediately. First aggressively, he thought it was suspicious, then almost approvingly as I explained myself. He decided it made me a character, something memorable. His boys patted me down like in a bad crime film. I bit my tongue instead of pointing out that if I were wired, I'd have the bug hidden in my jacket butt. The heroin sample did most of the talking for me anyway. They dragged their zombified mate back from the street, and he was living proof of the product's power. Steven grilled me with questions. I did my best not to answer. I framed it simply. I had access to a steady supply of high-quality heroin at prices he couldn't match anywhere else. If he worked with me and played by my rules, we'd both make a lot of money, and he'd impress his own bosses. He liked the sound of that. It was shaky at first. Handoffs, trust, routines, they all took time to settle. I met Steven's couriers in random but local locations, always with my face covered in ways that wouldn't attract too much attention. In winter, I'd wear a scarf and sunglasses, then just pull the scarf up. Whenever I met Steven himself, it was ski mask and sunglasses, and I never used my own car. Half kilos became kilos. The biggest single order I ever moved was 2 kilos, but the frequency increased as he built his customer base. Silk Road wasn't flawless. Poppy harvests varied. Vendors disappeared. Accounts got nuked, but it was good enough. Delivering the goods was always nerve-wracking. Walking around with thousands of doses of heroin on me felt like carrying a bomb. The fear never went away, but the money was intoxicating. Steven paid in cash, fat bundles of it. I laundered half through a sketchy credit union run by 2 Bangladeshi blokes who took 10% for the privilege of washing it. The rest I used for normal expenses, petrol, groceries, takeaway. Nothing flashy enough to raise eyebrows about all the 50-pound notes. This went on for over 2 years. Silk Road got shut down. Its founder was arrested. Another marketplace popped up to replace it. Business resumed after only a short break. Then came the day I almost got caught, or at least that's how it felt. One shipment of 2 kilos had just arrived, hidden inside a rice cooker, when a police officer knocked on my door. She said there'd been a string of burglaries in the area and asked if I'd seen anything. The heroin was still tucked inside the appliance, unopened in its box. Even if she'd come in, seen the rice cooker on my counter, there'd have been no reason to suspect it. But paranoia doesn't care about logic. When she left, my adrenaline crashed into raw fear. For the first time, I seriously thought about quitting. I'd made enough money to buy a house outright, enough to blow a chunk on fun, enough to squirrel away for a rainy decade. Nearly £1 million in total once it was all laundered. I decided to get out while I was ahead. I moved a few last packages for Stephen, padding my retirement fund. Then I called him to say I was done. I was naive enough to think he'd accept it, maybe even respect the decision. We weren't friends, but we were close in a strange way. You can't haul that much money through someone else's operation without forging some kind of bond. He did not take it well. Stephen went very quiet while I talked. That was alarming. He was usually a chatterbox, not exactly a great trait for a drug dealer. I explained my plan to bow out, offered to show him how crypto worked, even how to use Silk Road so he could cut out the middleman and order directly. He wasn't interested. He said he had no obligations to people, and that he couldn't downsize without getting the right liquidity. He loved misusing business lingo like that. Translation: without me, his profits would drop and he wasn't having it. Then he started threatening me, my family, anyone he could think of. The one thing I'd done right from day one was staying totally anonymous. All he had on me was an alias, my voice, and the clothes I wore during meetings, outfits I never used anywhere else. Unless he had some CIA-grade voice recognition machine hooked up to all of London, he had no way to track me down. Knowing that, I did what almost no one ever does. I hung up on an angry gangster. I won't pretend I felt cool doing it. I shook afterward. But once my nerves settled, I realized I wasn't in as much danger as my adrenaline had told me. We lived in different parts of the city. We moved in different circles. I'd only ever seen him at night. Our routines might as well have existed in parallel universes. If I happened to pass him on the street, as long as I kept my mouth shut, he'd never know it was me. I'd gotten away, I thought. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of dirty money, laundered and mined with no heat. It felt incredible. I laid low for about 6 months, kept my spending modest. Silk Road eventually went down for good in that time. Then I decided to finally treat myself. I went to a Bentley dealership, not for a brand new model, but one of their pre-owned cars. The certified pre-owned Bentley program is absurdly thorough. What you get is basically new without the new car price tag. I'd driven past the place a few times before, just to gape at the display models. Once I felt safe, money-wise, I started going in, chatting with the salespeople, asking about prices and availability. They tried to upsell me on flashier models, but I wanted something a bit more understated. Still a Bentley, but not a neon sign screaming drug money. That kind of car doesn't show up in the pre-owned pool as often, so I waited about 6 weeks. When the right one appeared, I rushed over and put down a deposit. It felt like a victory lap. I sat with the salesman, cracking jokes, signing paperwork, grinning like an idiot. The whole process took about 45 minutes. At some point, 2 men came into the showroom, wandered around the floor models, then started talking to a saleswoman. I barely noticed. I was too busy staring at the glossy photo of the car that was about to be mine. When everything was signed, the salesman gave me the pickup date. I shook his hand and headed for the exit. One of the 2 men was standing about 3 meters away, statue, still, staring at me. Growing up in London conditions, you not to meet that kind of stare. Staring back can escalate things, so I kept my eyes forward and thought, "What's your problem, mate?" Without actually saying it. It wasn't until I was just a few steps from the door that I risked a glance at his face. The instant I saw him, my blood went cold. It was Stephen. He was in a suit and tie, which is part of why I hadn't clocked him earlier. But once I did recognize him, it was undeniable, and he was looking at me like I just pulled off a mask in front of him. I was about to ask, "Can I help you?" out of reflex. Then I realized. I shut my mouth, forced my expression into neutral and looked away. "Do I know you?" he asked. He'd been within earshot the entire time I was joking with the salesman. He'd heard my voice for 20 minutes straight. No wonder something in him was nagging. I looked him dead in the eye, shook my head once and kept walking. Every step toward the door felt like wading through cement. I resisted the urge to run to my car and peel out. As I drove out of the lot, I saw him standing outside the showroom doors, phone in hand, clearly filming or snapping photos of my number plate. That's when the panic really slammed into me. My vision blurred at the edges, my chest clenched, breathing turned shallow. It felt like a heart attack and a panic attack at once. Stopping was not an option. For all I knew, he was a few cars behind me in traffic. I drove aimlessly, putting distance between my flat and myself. Eventually, I turned into the car park of some random apartment block and killed the engine. That was the first moment I had to actually think. At first, it was a relief just not to be moving. Then the reality set in. Steven had recognized me. Maybe he wasn't completely sure yet, but sure enough to get my registration and check. Once he did, once the bloke who'd sworn to kill me got my address, I knew what would happen. He wouldn't just murder me quickly, he'd make it slow. The panic surged back. I fought to get my breathing under control. After a minute, a horrible clarity came. The only solution was one I'd never wanted to consider. Step 1. Abandon the Bentley right where it sat. Walk away. Step 2. Get my girlfriend to safety. I called her and told her she needed to pack a bag and go stay with her mum immediately. She heard the strain in my voice and knew something was very wrong. I promised to explain in person later, but for now, she had to leave our flat and not go back. It took me hours to walk home. Plenty of time to beg, persuade, argue. In the end, she listened. She left. When I reached the flat, I grabbed the essentials, clothes, documents, the bricks of cash I'd hidden, and took a taxi to a mate's place. I asked if I could crash there for a few days. I bought his car off him the next morning for far more than it was worth. Before that, I drove to my girlfriend's mum's house. In a private conversation upstairs, I told her everything. She'd had no idea I was moving heroin. She thought I was repairing appliances for some mail-in electronics firm. I told her I'd saved for the Bentley since I was 16, and since I'd always been good with money and had an okay salary, she never doubted it. I imagined she might decide to stick it out with me, accept my plan to move to another city under the radar. She didn't. She dumped me on the spot, said she never wanted to see me again. Dealing drugs was one thing, putting her in danger was another. And if it was just a matter of time before Steven traced that registration number back to our front door, then I needed to leave that night. That's the last conversation we ever had. The next day, with my mate's car now legally mine, I drove north and never went back to London. Leaving gutted me. My parents didn't understand why I was going. I couldn't tell them the truth, so I claimed I'd landed a higher-paying job up north. They wondered why I always insisted on them visiting me and never the other way around. I think they suspect more than they say. Maybe someday I'll tell them how one arrogant, greedy decision destroyed every relationship I had and forced me into a kind of self-imposed exile. I had the Bentley delivered up to Manchester, by the way. For a while, it comforted me. Then it became an endlessly parked reminder of what my greed and the dark web had cost me. I sold it not long after. Okay, so the TLDR of this is really simple. Don't screw around with the deep web. If you don't read anything else I say, please absorb that. I used to be heavily into cryptocurrencies. I won't bore you with all the techie bits, but I had 4 figures worth in various coins and was always hunting for ways to grow the stack. A lot of crypto nerds congregate on deep web forums, partly because they're paranoid about the surface web being monitored. They're not entirely wrong. That's where a mutual acquaintance introduced me to someone calling himself Andre. Andre claimed to run a crypto investment fund out of Belarus. According to him, if I invested with his pool, I could double or even triple my money in a matter of months. The friend who introduced us swore Andre was legit. So after a few weeks of chatting with him, feeling him out, making sure he at least seemed competent and not totally unhinged, I decided to take the plunge. I sent him the same amount of Bitcoin my buddy had sent and waited to see what would happen. For a while, what happened looked very good. Every week Andre would send me an update. My little pot grew, slowly at first. Then the numbers started jumping. Eventually, I was sitting on about 10 times what I'd originally handed over, on paper anyway. It wasn't enough to retire on, but it was enough that losing it would hurt badly. I decided I wanted out while I was ahead. I pinged Andre and asked how I'd go about withdrawing my earnings. He got very insistent, very fast. He told me it would be foolish to back out now, that I shouldn't lose my nerve, that if I just waited a few more months, I'd be looking at tens of thousands instead of a few thousand. I wanted more money, obviously, but I also knew the longer you leave your funds in someone else's control, the higher the risk of never seeing them again. Respectfully, I told him I still wanted to withdraw. He couldn't physically stop me, of course. When I requested a withdrawal, my wallet balance on his site went to zero. But the amount that actually hit my real wallet was just my original stake. All the supposed profits vanished. That was my, oh, it's a scam moment. Whatever was actually going on behind the scenes, it sure as hell wasn't benefiting me. I went back to the friend who'd introduced us and told him what happened. I expected shock, maybe an apology. Instead, he turned on me. He insisted Andre was on the level and that I'd made a huge mistake pulling out. According to him, by withdrawing when I did, I jeopardized the whole system for everyone, including him. If I just reinvested, all would be forgiven. When I pushed back, tried to warn him, nothing got through. It was like talking to a wall that only cared about one thing, me sending that Bitcoin back. That's when it hit me that my friend was probably in on the con. Maybe he was getting a cut for recruiting people. Maybe he was Andre. Either way, he started leaning into threats. He told me Andre and his people were not the kind of guys you wanted to cross. Normally, with my level of online security, that would have sounded like empty bluster. I was careful. VPNs, Tor, separate machines, the works. On their own, I don't think they could have found me. But if my friend handed over my real IP address at some point, then yeah, they had a way in. It started on my PC. One night, my computer froze. Then Internet Explorer popped open on its own. A file downloaded and started installing itself while I was shouting, "No, no, no, no," like that would help. I yanked the power cables out of the back, heart pounding. I checked my VPN logs afterward. Everything looked like it had been active at the time of the attack. I hoped I'd disconnected fast enough. I hadn't. Within days, weird things started happening around my apartment. I came home one afternoon and found the window nearest the fire escape wide open. I was absolutely sure I'd shut it that morning. Nothing looked disturbed inside, but that didn't comfort me. That was enough to make me pack a go bag and start looking for somewhere else to stay until things cooled down. I didn't get the chance. That same night, after I'd backed up my essentials, someone stole my car. The next morning, I found a piece of paper in my mailbox with a single word on it: reinvest. I left for my mom's house that day. Over the next couple of days, I filed a stolen vehicle report and canceled my apartment lease, which was month to month. It was brutal having to effectively trash all my electronics on the assumption they were compromised. It took me years to fully replace everything. And that still wasn't the worst part. On the day my lease ended, I went back to the apartment to clear out what little I had left. I was walking toward my mom's car with a bag of clothes in each hand when a car turned into the lot and accelerated straight toward me. I dove behind a parked car. The oncoming vehicle smashed into it, then reversed and sped away. My mom, who was watching from a distance, completely freaked out. She just nearly witnessed her son get flattened. That's when I finally told her the whole story. Say what you want about me being a mama's boy, but seeing her go full mama bear was one of the only bright spots in that whole nightmare. She insisted I go live with my uncle out of state for a while. She had my dad teach her how to shoot his handgun, just in case anyone came looking for me at their place. She and my uncle got me through a time when I genuinely thought I might be killed over a crypto scam. She even slipped me a few $100s so I could buy a cheap laptop and phone to start rebuilding. I paid her back once I finally cashed out the crypto I still controlled, but that early help meant a lot. I still don't fully understand how Andre's operation worked. My guess is he used new investors' deposits to show returns to earlier ones, classic Ponzi style, and then skimmed off a fat share for himself and his associates. What I do know is that whoever he really was, he had access to some dangerous people. People willing and able to intrude on my home, steal my car, and try to run me down with a vehicle just to send a message, all over some imaginary investment fund on the deep web. So yeah, don't mess with it. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Hit the notification bell if you want to know when future narrations drop. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, and I do live streams on Sunday and Wednesday nights. If you've got a story you'd like me to read, send it to letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com. You might hear it in an upcoming video. If you want to support the channel even more, you can get early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button here on YouTube to see all the membership perks. You can also check out the Let's Read podcast. It's where you'll find these stories in big compilation episodes, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're into true crime, I have a separate channel called Saturn's Soul you should absolutely go subscribe to. All the links are down in the description. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, that's all the time we have today, folks. WH.